Hi. I'm supposed to use this, right? Okay. Hi, guys. Hi. Yeah, it's really nice to be here. What an amazing event. It's such an indulgence to get to go to a conference that's all wearables and etextiles and all these amazing things. Like usually when I go, there's like one thing happening about that stuff. So for me, this is a real treat. It was so amazing to see all the work last night and all that. So thanks for having me. I was here back at the end of July for another event, and I was at a show, and I saw this guy with this light-up jacket, and I was like, oh, well, I have to go talk to him. And so that was Thomas, and he invited me out for this, so I'm really glad to be here. So anyway, my name is Kate Hartman. I live in Toronto, in Canada, although I'm secretly an American. And so, let's see if this will work. As he said, I'm an associate professor at OCAD University, formerly known as the Ontario College of Art and Design, because we like to rebrand. And there I teach physical computing and wearable tech. I also run a lab called the Social Body Lab, which I'll tell you a bit about. And then I also, on occasion, well, during the summer, I go back to New York and I run a summer program called ITP Camp. So if you guys are ever interested in hanging out in New York and doing, tech stuff for a month, I'll be there and you're invited. So, yeah. Anyway, I do a lot of work with wearable and body-centric technology. So I'm really interested in technology that lives close to the skin, right? And so I think the reason why this is really interesting is because it's super intimate. Like in terms of thinking about interactive experiences, wearables are ones that really kind of like get up in your business. And so, they feel quite intimate. And things that we wear on our body sometimes even start to feel like a part of ourselves. And so in a way, as artists and designers, this is an opportunity for us to really engage with a person's sense of self or their kind of identity in a way. So it's a pretty neat and intense space to work in. So I'm really interested in technologies that affect the way in which we relate to ourselves, the way in which we relate to each other and the world around us. So these kind of interactions that radiate out from the body. So I'm just going to tell you guys a bit about my work, going a little bit back, because I don't know, why not? So I'm a lot of different things. Like I'm an artist, I'm a designer, I'm a technologist, I'm an educator, and so these things all kind of blend together in my work, and I approach wearables from a lot of different angles. So the first things I'll show you are some of my earlier projects, and when I was in graduate school in New York, I got really into making these things that I thought of as sort of inquisitive devices. So although I was also working with sort of hard interactive technology at the time, I was making these things that were meant to kind of take up space and ask questions. So to literally take an idea and to put it into physical form. So I don't know, it's kind of hard to see in the projection, but these are some of like the wacky devices that I made. So things like taking the idea of what if you could take the sound of your thoughts and sort of physically pull them out of your head, right? And in such a way that someone else could listen to them. And these are supposed to be weird, so if you think it's funny, I won't get offended if you laugh. So anyway, so this one's called the muttering hat, and it's kind of about this idea of pulling the sound of your thoughts out and sharing it with someone else. Apparently he agreed. And so, I started doing this in a lot of different forms. So this one's called the talk to yourself hat. And so it creates the physical space for you to have a conversation with yourself. So you can actually speak out loud, and the sound of your voice is channeled back into your own ears, and you can still have a private conversation. Really good for brainstorming. This one's called the inflatable heart. So this is kind of an external organ that you can wear, anywhere on your body. It's meant to be a tool for expression. So the wearer can inflate it and deflate it at whatever time they want. So it can be used to express lust. It can be used to express excitement or admiration. It can be used to express fear or anxiety. So people use it in a lot of different ways. And so even with these sort of like conceptual prototypes, these less technical prototypes, very early on I got very interested in kind of making multiples. Because when I see these things in my head, I see everybody wearing them, right? It's not a one-off. It's about kind of a collective social experience. And it's interesting, looking at emerging wearable technologies because all of a sudden, like, we're starting to wear all these weird things in public, right? We've seen this, start to progress. And, when everybody's wearing something in a room, suddenly it becomes normal. Like, that's the moment when it tips. And we're like, oh yeah, this is what we do. Whatever. We all have inflatable hearts. So anyway, so I would make these kits. This was part of my master's thesis, but I'd make these kits that included my device. So I'd make a lot of multiples of them and send them out to different people for device tests. And so they would have these instructions about how to, sort of videotape themselves testing it in different environments, and also how to use it. But they're meant to be kind of provocations and sort of playful. So things like with the inflatable heart, it would say, this device is daring but delicate, capable of making a bold statement, but only when risking explosion. Handle with care, but use with courage. After all, hearts are meant to be broken. So instructions like that. So anyway, some of them were about more than one person. This is a discommunicator, which is a tool for arguments. So when you speak out loud, you have this sort of forced eye contact with the person. So you have the emotional exchange, but the words are absorbed. So no one, like later on, the person can't say, like, I can't believe you said that to me. So you have the effect of emotional exchange, but you don't get in trouble later on. And then things relating to how we relate to the environment. So when I was living in New York City, I was like, what's the body language between humans and buildings? Like, how can I better relate to all these like structures that are surrounding me? And I was like, okay, well, maybe if I want to, relate to a wall, I could perhaps be more wall-like myself. So I built myself this like weird wearable wall apparatus, and I took it out into the streets. And it was neat because I could actually create new architectural spaces, or I could augment existing ones, or I could do traffic control. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then kind of the last work in this series, I was hanging out in Banff in Alberta, Canada. And I was encountering glaciers for the very first time. And I was like, man, these things are nuts. Because they're so old and they move so slowly, but they're disappearing. And there's a lot of stuff there. But I was like, okay, how could we improve human-glacier relations? Because it seems like, they're leaving soon, so we might want to kind of get as much contact in as we can. So I made the glacier embracing suit. So this is it's constructed out of a heat-reflective material that serves to mediate the difference in temperature between the human body and the glacial ice. So the person doesn't get too cold, the glacier doesn't melt, but you can still have, a kind of nonverbal interaction. So anyway, those are the early chapters. I learned there's not a huge market for glacier embracing suits at the moment. So I also have a job. So I work at OCAD University. This is our kind of iconic building on stilts. You can see the CN Tower there. I actually work down the street in the South Campus, and I look at this thing. But it's cool, because I moved up there about 5 years ago to help start a program called the Digital Futures Program. And specifically, my piece of that is I teach wearable technology. And so I work with all these students from, really neat disciplines like textiles and industrial design and graphic design and painting and stuff like that. And I teach them how to work with, electronics and how to actually incorporate that into their existing practices. And now that we've got this new program online, they're kind of coming to the school specifically to do things like interactive technologies and wearable tech. So it's a lot of fun. And I have this lab there called the Social Body Lab. And we've been around since about 2010, and we work with body-centric technologies in the social context. So when I showed up, they were like, okay, we want you to make like this wearable tech lab. And I was like, okay, that's great, but I don't want it to just be anything wearable tech. I want to kind of narrow that down a little bit. And so the way in which I'm really interested in wearable tech is how it relates to people and how it relates to how we relate to each other. So anyway, so I've got these students from all these different disciplines. This is just the most recent sampling of them, but it's just great, the amazing talent that moves through there. So I'll show you some of the projects that we've been working on. There's kind of a broad span to them. Early on, we started with a lot of sort of DIY wearables. So we're really interested in engaging people in the practice of making wearable technology, which I think is something that interests a lot of you here, which is why it's really nice to talk to you. Hi. So anyway, so we did a series of tutorials around wireless wearable communication, specifically working with XB radio transceivers. We made a couple different projects and full instructions, sort of inviting people into the act of making wireless wearables. So this one is the superhero communicator cuffs, where you can call your superhero partner for backup when you need it by doing a special gesture. We also had one called the audience jacket, which basically, as a single person, you could embody a whole audience. So when you clapped your hands, you'd hear the sound of, a whole room of people clapping. And if you put your thumbs down, it would go boo, and if you went like that, it would go woo. So anyway, a lot of this stuff is using, a lot of the materials you guys are familiar with, like lily pad components and conductive fabric and thread and all that. And we published the code. So this was a neat stepping stone, but the thing that we found in terms of publishing these tutorials is it took a long time for people to get going who are new to it. And so, actually doing things like configuring the radios and building out the whole circuit, they're really important skills to have, but sometimes it's not always the right entry point for everyone. So we wanted to make something that was kind of more accessible to designers in particular. And it just so happened that we had this project called the NedJables. So imagine you're at a cocktail party, right? Or even in a room like this. Oftentimes when we're in a room, in a situation, there's multiple levels of communication happening, right? So in the cocktail party scenario, like you may be talking to the person you're talking to, right? Having a verbal exchange and all of that. But you may have kind of like a glance exchange with the person across the room where you're kind of like, get me out of here. Or like, yeah, you want to change the topic or something like that. In the case of this room, like it might be that, I'm talking and you guys are listening, but it could be that, I show a weird hat or something and you like say something to the person next to you, or you like nudge them because it reminds me of some joke from before. Or you could even be getting like electronic communication, like text messages or emails on your phone or laptop or something like that. But anyway, point being that there's always these different levels of communication. So with the NedJables, we wanted to take the physical act of a nudge, just that physical like poking someone next to you, and just physically extend that across a room. Not farther, it could be farther, but we decided, we wanted it to be in the same space, because oftentimes that's, how like a bunch of different layers of communication happen. So, and we wanted it to be a really subtle gesture that would trigger the nudge, because it is kind of about this back channel concept. So we did a couple of early prototypes. One was a set of these garters so that when you crossed your leg surreptitiously, it would send the signal and the other person would receive a vibration. Another was this crazy, like, wild pin thing that had a pinch switch underneath it. And so when you played with the tassels of the pin, it would send the signal. So yeah, so that kind of was a nice way to prototype our idea. And so we were using, existing components, like this LilyPad XP board and a LilyPad vibrating motor and, all this stuff. But we were finding that we wanted to share it with more people so that there could be lots of NedJables. But just the bill of materials was too expensive, and it was also too big. Like, we were finding the circuits to be too bulky. So we decided to create the NedJables accessory kit, which basically, was our own designed hardware that allowed designers to work more quickly, with this existing circuit so that they could actually focus on the act of designing the wearable as opposed to designing the technology. And so it's a really simple thing, right? Doing circuit board design, circuit board design isn't simple necessarily unless it's your trade, but like making a circuit into a printed circuit board is pretty standard practice. But we really just tried to sort of incorporate like the things that would make it a lot easier for someone who didn't know how to work with this stuff to use it. So simple things like we had different options, like we used the sew tabs like the lily pad has, but then we also had this really neat plug and play connector so that you could sort of assemble it very quickly. And just a lot of debug tools on here, which I won't bore you with at the moment, but just so that it makes it really easy to see what's happening very quickly. And so, and we worked with this really nice, sorry, it's hard to see this, but these really beautiful connectors that were new to me at the time. They're called PTSM connectors. Let's get really nerdy here. But good connectors are so important. Anyway, they're nice because they can plug and unplug very easily. You can't plug them in backwards, and you can replace the wire with them. They're spring-loaded, so it's beautiful. Like, totally, yeah. Anyway, this is the kind of the process of putting it together. And so it's neat because you can, you can put the circuit together very quickly. Actually, oh yeah. Well, anyway. But yeah, so a completed circuit looks like this. And these are like our nice next level white circuit boards. But so the basic plan here is just you've got a switch on one side and a vibrating motor on the other, but you can swap that out for whatever you want, and so it can set off like a different type of motor, a buzzer, lights, whatever. Like you could have like a trafopop jacket going off when a person gets nudged, that sort of thing. And the input can be any kind of digital switch. So basically a switch is just two pieces of conductive material touching. And so, like we saw, there were some beautiful switch examples last night at the exhibition. But we really wanted to let that be an area of exploration for people. And so it's cool. So the designers, instead of having to put together the circuit from scratch, they could really focus on, okay, how is this physically going to get embedded in the wearable, in the clothing? What is the switch going to be? How can I incorporate that in like an interesting way, like in a sort of intuitive gesture? And then also, like, what's the experience of being notified? Like, how do you receive the nudge? If it's a vibrating motor, like, where are you going to put it? If it's lights, like, what is it going to look like? If it's a sound, what is it going to sound like? So they could sort of move on to those design considerations. So we worked with some local designers, and they made a lot of different things. So that was the one that was in the diagram before. But this is just a pair of a t-shirt and a pendant. So when you, and on the back of the pendant is conductive material. So when you touch the pendant to the t-shirt in a certain spot, it'll close the switch. This one is just, a standard scarf, but it has conductive thread knitted into the pink part of the scarf here. So when you touch the two pink parts together, that sends a nudge. This is, a simple shirt where a button is installed in the cuff. So these are all like really surreptitious, sort of secret signal spy stuff kind of things. A necklace, fancy belt buckle. These socks are for a dance party where if you kind of like, step on your own foot, you send a nudge. And then, your classic business tie, which is excellent for, business meetings. When your business partner starts talking about confidential stuff, you can nudge them. But anyway, it's interesting because all of these objects, they look like clothing. Imagine that, wearable technology that looks like real clothing. So that was kind of the point. So it's in some ways, it's like a really unsexy project, right? Because it's like, where's the bling? But anyway, that was kind of the point. So yeah, and then so some of the other explorations that we do are more along the lines of like material explorations or fashion, that sort of thing. So this one called the Vega Edge was a collaboration with Angela Mackey, who's a fashion designer, and she's in Gothenburg in Sweden. And so she had been making a lot of these light-up jackets, and she wanted to make something that was, a bit different, more of an accessory. And so she partnered with us. And so we did a lot of kind of like material prototyping and materials research to look at something that would be smaller and lower cost that could have the same effect of providing some wearable light on a daily basis. But that would be kind of in the smaller, sort of more modular form factor. Because basically the jackets she was making were just kind of out of the price point for most, like the average person who's kind of interested in wearable tech. So anyway, we came up with a couple different designs. Worked with a lot of kind of the standard rapid prototyping approach. Both of these things were things that would clip onto the edge of clothing. One design which we didn't pursue included like a like a 3D printed mold for silicone. It's kind of, you can make really neat molds these days. But yeah, it was like this weird light stick that would clip to your thing. But then the design we ended up going with started with this. And it was like this weird like magnetic thing, like magnetic LED thing that could basically clip to the edge of any piece of clothing, including like a heavy winter jacket. And so we went through a lot of sort of design development, kind of working with, we wanted it to be leather because we thought that would be, kind of like a nice looking material. Something that was really important to us was that ultimately it would have a good off value. So when it was turned off, it didn't look like a gadget. It looked like kind of a neat little accessory. So we went through a lot of sort of different iterations and eventually settled on this technique of installing these magnets, really sort of strong, heavy earth magnets, and we came up with a design that looks something like this. And so we've been calling it, her brand is called Vega, we've been calling it the Vega X for a while, and then we realized, it clips to the edge, so we changed it to the Vega Edge. And so basically, all you have to do is open it up, and it can sort of clip on very tightly. So it's made of laser cut leather in these light boards. And there's a bit of reflective material, so even when it's off, it can provide visibility if you're wearing it for cycling. And then it looks something like this. So we made a bunch of them, and people wanted to try them out, and so we ended up deciding to do kind of like a Kickstarter campaign for them. So we did a little crowdfunding campaign and raised the money, and then did a run of about 600 of them, which is a weird number because it's not that much, but it is, it's more than 30. And like I've worked on. In my non-wearables work, I've done some like DIY kits and stuff like that before. So I have some experience with this stuff, but it was, it was a different ballgame because in terms of working with non-electronics materials and trying to do that in quantity and all that, like I don't know if you guys are, any of you are fashion designers, you might know about sort of like producing limited editions, that sort of thing, but it's complicated. So anyway, after we got funded, we went and we made a few more design changes, which was, that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have it all figured out ahead of time. But we ended up switching. These are like, kind of the techie details, but we ended up switching from a non-rechargeable to a rechargeable battery because we really wanted something that was a lot brighter. We felt like the prototype we had at the time just wasn't bright enough. And so for, the coin cell batteries, the non-rechargeable ones are 3 volts, the rechargeable ones are 3.7 volts, and it's a really important difference sometimes. Another design development we did was we switched from working with these like standard disc magnets to getting our own magnets custom produced, which is awesome. Like you can actually just send a CAD file of the shape of the magnet you want, and they'll make it. Like you have to pay for it, but and these 4 magnets cost us $200 for the sample, and I was just like, oh. But anyway, it's really cool because so they're kind of like they're almost like a really squat top hat, and so what's nice about it is it holds it in place in the leather, through tension as well as the adhesive we're working with. But there's just a lot of interesting things that come up working in quantity, like trying to make sure all the leather is the same color, and cows aren't shaped like laser cutter beds. And simple things that like end up taking a lot of time. But it's really fun getting circuit boards produced and populated in multiples. But yeah, anyway, Kickstarters, if anyone wants to talk about. Have you guys done crowdfunding campaigns? Anyone done any? Kickstarter, Indiegogo, whatever? No? Okay, they're complicated. But yeah, and it's interesting because, you do this and you think you've got it all figured out, but there are still like flaws, and at a certain point you can't fix the flaws. So I won't even tell you what's wrong here, but when I see it, it's really interesting, but also kind of cool to like sort of think through a process from beginning to end. And I think one of the challenges overall with a lot of wearables-oriented stuff right now is the production and manufacturing processes, because we're bringing together things from different worlds, right? So like electronics and circuit manufacturing is kind of one world, and fashion and textiles and all that is another world. And actually finding places that are willing to put those two things together is quite complicated. even for us, we ended up doing the in-between work between like our leather worker and our electronics people, because we couldn't find anyone who wanted to actually stick the circuit boards in the leather for us. So it's a weird thing to think about, but kind of significant. But anyway, lots. Shipping, crazy. And we did, like, a lot of our stuff was done locally in Toronto, and so it was like almost all on bikes, so like, giant camping backpacks stuffed with, envelopes. So anyway, that's our campaign. But it was neat to kind of get, like, once again, it's a totally different thing. It's like a little light up LED thing. But for me, making things and getting them into the hands of other people is really important, because you start to see how they behave and how they exist in the world. So the last series of projects I'll tell you about from the lab is our most recent. So the kind of umbrella for them is called the prosthetic technologies of being. And so this is a collaboration with Intel Research. And so we had an anthropologist from Intel approach us a little while ago and say, hey, like, I'm really interested in technologies, wearable technologies that feel like an extension of ourselves. Like, would you guys be interested in playing in that area? And we were like, hell yeah. So, so it's been a lot of fun. So we've kind of been creating these prototypes that explore this concept in a lot of different ways. So this concept of like extension of self. So some of our early prototypes, like for a while we were thinking about sensing. And so this one is called Cardinal, and it's sort of like a little capelet that senses, it has a compass in it, and it senses the direction of home or the direction of a loved one, basically the direction of something that's significant to you. And whatever side of your body is facing that direction, if you stay still for a little while, it will start to warm. And so you'll feel that. But then also, gradually, the pattern of the capelet will start to shift. So it's just using some of these sort of thermochromic inks. And so as it heats, like you, as the wearer, feel it, but then also the people who are looking at you can sort of see this kind of change in the design. So this is kind of like a sensing exploration, so sort of feeling the direction of warmth, like whatever warmth is to you far away, a person or a place. But then we quickly moved into this idea of sort of a physical, actuated extension of self. So kind of, we do this anyway with our body language, but how we can kind of expand and contract, to express ourselves in different ways. And so we do this with our posture, right, and the way we hold ourselves. We also do it with different clothing. We do it with like high heels and shoulder pads and different things. So we started working with this sensor called EMG, electromyography. And so it just senses the electrical activity in your muscles, and worked with actuating servo. So you can see as this person's opening and closing their hand, it's controlling this motor here. And so we're like, okay, how can we work with that? And what are ways in which clothing naturally expands and contracts? And so we kind of got into the area of working with folding and pleating. And so there's actually a really great book called Folding for Designers, which I love. Anyway, we sort of started exploring this as a way to make textiles expand and contract. So we came up with a couple different models. This one is a first iteration of a project that's a hood. It's called Nautilus. And so this is basically just a servo motor actuating like a paper version. And so then from there, we moved on to creating this kind of textile version. So it's kind of like 2 layers of fabric, one layer that's laser cut and ironed on to sort of create the negative space between the folds. Pleating this takes forever. If anyone has tips about non-standard pleating, I would love them. But anyway, so this one actuates, it's sensing kind of the muscles around the back of the neck. So it's sensing a shrug, right? So that kind of, which is something we kind of do sometimes when we want to turn inwards. And so the idea with this was that it would raise and lower the hood. So yeah, it's kind of like a shrug on, shrug off. So anyway, so this was a first prototype. This one turned out to be not super structurally sound and a bit too heavy. So we chose not to pursue this one, but it was a really good exploration. One muscle set that we really found to be quite productive to work with is just the bicep, right? Because it's like people don't feel super weird about wearing things on their arms. It's not like a very intimate area, and it tends to be a muscle that people are comfortable with actuating. Like we're not always necessarily very connected to all of our different muscles, but a bicep's pretty standard. So with this one, we used it to actuate these sort of shoulder-based devices. And so this one's called Monarch. And so this one turned out to be like a blast. And I have to say, like, it is, I wish I could have brought one to show you guys. It is so much fun to wear. And it was really interesting because, so we made the one and we're like, all right, this is the one we're gonna go with. And so then we went on to produce more of them. So basically all that's happening here is, when you flex, well, this is the kind of on-off mode. So when you flex your muscle, it'll go up. When you flex again, it goes back down. But we also have a few different modes. Another one is where, like, when you flex it and hold it, it will stay up. And then when you relax, it comes back down. So that one's a bit more organic. And then we've tried a couple other ones beyond that. But anyway, so we went and we made multiples. And so then once again, we went out and we tried them with a bunch of different people. So I'll show you a couple weird videos from the user testing. Please don't take pictures of them because ethically I'm allowed to show it in a conference but not put it on the internet. So, so we did all these. I have to say, so once again, like when there's one, it's like, okay, like that's really quirky and weird, but like, that person's wearing this costume. Suddenly when everybody in the room is wearing them, it becomes sort of normal, like even after like 10 minutes. So we would start and we would do these kind of warm-up exercises. We would do these improv exercises in a circle, whatever, just standing there. And then we would suit everyone up and we would do the exercise again. And it was like a clapping thing where we had to like clap and pass the clap to the next person. And then instead of doing the clap, people would like raise their, we still don't have like a word for what these things are, but like wings, shoulder pads, whatever. And so it became, this kind of like added option for body language, right? And so it was really interesting because people use them in really different ways. Like some people use them to be very like assertive, like I'm talking now, you must listen to me. That's what Borzi did. And some of them, used it to be kind of comical. Some of them used it to be flirtatious. I don't know. It's really quite interesting to see what happened. Like some of it almost became like bird-like, like they would kind of like chatter with the wings. I don't know. It was quite interesting. Anyway, this one, it's too bad you can't see this too well, but it was. Yeah, this one was sort of like more of a defense mechanism. And it was, it takes a lot of calibration, but for some people it would like go off, and they had control over their own calibration, which we thought was really important. But, sometimes it would go off accidentally, which is like, I don't know, I always get in trouble because of my face, because I make facial expressions when I don't know I'm doing it, and people are like, why are you making that face? And I'm like, it's my face. But anyway, that would happen with the wings as well. So anyway, we did the whole like user testing survey, all that. But one of the questions that was my favorite was, please circle the pair of circles that most closely illustrates your relationship to this prosthetic. And I thought it was really cool that the majority of people were here. A few people felt like adjacent to the device. A few people felt like the device was kind of, really part of them. But a few people felt like, we're kind of getting together. We're getting there. And I thought that was pretty good, right? Like, I don't know. That was better than I expected. But once again, it's just interesting how wearables can really start to feel like a part of you. The other thing that was neat is that people didn't want to take them off. Like once they got comfortable with them, they were like, yeah, I don't want to. We'd be like, oh, we'll take it off for you now, and you can sit down and do your survey. And they were like, can we keep it on? And then they also requested selfie time. So they wanted to take pictures of themselves wearing it, which is kind of funny. Anyway, so this project we're actually pursuing, but we're doing a whole different version that's way less. Well, it's going to be way more integrated. So we're actually like this was kind of like a first garish prototype, but we're looking to integrate it more into existing clothing to have it work on a smaller scale. So we're, part of the reason for the big apparatus with the leather harness and all that was just to hold the electronics. So we're shrinking the electronics. We're doing a lot more material investigation, and so we're looking to see what it will be like to actually incorporate these mechanisms into more streamlined fashion pieces. So that's what's coming next. Anyway, so that's my lab. So you can kind of see the span. So it's everything from like wireless wearable communication to fashion stuff to ridiculousness, which is my favorite. So, but no, like human connectedness, human expression, human communication. So the last thing I'll tell you about is a book that I wrote called Make Wearable Electronics, and it came out last month. I'm very happy that it's done. Anyway, so this has been an interesting exploration for me. So I've been teaching this stuff for about 6 years, and I never was quite happy with the selection of books that were available. And I was bugging the O'Reilly guys at some point. I was like, you guys really need a wearables book that has microcontrollers in it. And they were like, okay, why don't you make it? And so that took 2 years of my life. But anyway, it's out. And so this basically goes from beginning to end, not end, beginning to the beginning of the next phase on how to work with different materials and parts to make wearable electronics. So it starts with like conductive materials, looking at fabric and thread and wires and all that stuff, to how to make basic circuits, to how to work with sensors and actuators and wireless communication. And throughout the book, it's sort of sprinkled with project examples. There's over like 60 artists and designers that are represented in it. Yeah. Oh, cool, thanks. Yes. So anyway, and not to say that there's not other books in this space, like there's tons of amazing books, and actually there's a fantastic book in German by the same publisher from Renee, who was here last night, that you guys should totally check out. But anyway, for the English-speaking audience, I hope you enjoy it. But anyway, so this has gotten me thinking. So I kind of exhausted my knowledge in writing, like you write a book and you're like, okay, that took a lot of, it made me realize how much I didn't know, but then it also kind of, took a lot of what I did know. And it made me think a lot about like where to go with wearables. And so this is something I've been thinking about a lot, because since I started working in this space, things have changed a lot, in the last 6, 7, 8 years. So I've been thinking about this from the perspective of the classroom, right? So I teach this stuff, and my students are now graduating and going out into the world and making their projects and starting their companies and doing all this crazy stuff that is totally awesome. I've been thinking about it from kind of like a maker DIY perspective in terms of how do you actually demonstrate to people how to make this stuff with existing tools that are out there. And then also in terms of kind of working in the lab and also collaborating with people from industry in terms of like all that stuff. So I don't know, what's my point? Now I'm ranting. So yeah, I guess one of the things that, the point is that it's a really interesting time to work in this space. And I think some of the great questions to ask are, number one, looking at all the stuff, like the stuff that's being produced commercially, the stuff that's being produced within the art and design realm, the stuff that we're making, us as makers in the room. What's missing, right? Like, so if we do a scan and look at all this stuff, like what's missing? What is not being represented? Where where is it missing the mark? Where are we kind of like making things that maybe we don't need? I don't know. And then also like what's next? And I think it's interesting because we've seen this big boom of the kind of etextiles movement, which is awesome, and it's gotten so many people involved. We've seen all these like amazing toolkits emerge and DIY instructions and maker culture and stuff around how to make these soft circuits and all this cool stuff. And then we've also seen a big spike in the release of like a lot of new consumer-oriented wearable technologies. But I think there's a gap, and I think it's really interesting to think about what tools are out there and how we can better enable people who are interested in influencing like the future of wearables, how we can sort of kit them up in such a way that they can be producing things that could eventually go to market or could eventually have like a bigger influence. And so anyway, I've just been, I don't know, random thoughts. I've been thinking about toolkits or platforms as springboards, but also as baggage. So, for instance, working with like conductive thread is a really interesting and neat material, but it also has a lot of challenges. And so, in some ways, some of the etextile platforms introduce it. Some people feel pressure. They're like I have students apologizing to me, and they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I should have used the conductive thread." I'm like, I don't care what conductive material you use, whatever it takes to get the job done. I'm obsessed with better connectors, as you guys already heard, but I think it actually is really important in terms of being able to, like, modularity in wearable tech is really important because with clothing, we need to wash it, right? And electronics and circuits are still expensive. So being able to remove technology from clothing, I think, will remain important for a while. And in order to do that, we need better, more robust, smaller, sexier connectors. And then sexy connectors. That's what you should tweet, sexy connectors. And then platforms that bridge the divide, right? So there's so many like different, when you read a lot of articles about wearable technology from the last 6 months, there's all these words that indicate like divide, gap, separation, these kind of distances between one thing or the other. And the two sides of that it could be like hard and soft. It can be electronics and fashion. It can be like there's all these different kind of dichotomies. But anyway, kind of thinking about how to bring it all together and integrate things is one of the big challenges. But yeah, the question that I'd like to ask my students, but also people like you, is what actually makes something wearable? Not just how can we strap it to our bodies, right? Like, because you get some Velcro, you're good to go. But like for us as humans, in terms of our lived experience, like what makes something wearable? What makes something feel enough like a part of you and enough of a useful or interesting or provocative aspect of your lived experience to be wearable in a holistic sense? And then like if you want to go like big picture, how do we want to live with technology? So this is a growing question, and we're at the moment where, some of us may be feeling a bit overwhelmed with our communications or our digital responsibilities, that sort of thing. Some people, may be just loving it. But anyway, technology is becoming a bigger and bigger part of our lives, and that's cool. Like that's what's going on, but just like, how do we want that to play out? And at a moment when wearable tech is finally starting to pick up a bit, I think it's really important to really think actively and critically and imaginatively about that, because this is a moment when people like us can sort of have a bigger voice in the conversation in terms of the things that we make and the avenues that we pursue. So yeah, something to think about. Thanks.